Welcome to the Speaking Podcast. You can find all our episodes on speakingpodcast.com. We're also on BitChute and YouTube. You'll find the links in the podcast description. I've got 4 other podcasts: the meditation podcast to help you chill, the awakening to expose fraud and corruption, but with solutions, the crypto podcast to talk about blockchain technology, NFTs, and the Learn Polish podcast to obviously learn Polish. And I'm also a podcasting coach. You'll find everything on bio.link/podcaster. Today, my guest in South Africa, please welcome Alfi Oloo.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm really excited to get into the discussion today, and it's, a topic or a category of subject matter that I love. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, no. I've looked at a lot of things I'm looking forward to myself, but you might let the listeners know. Who's Alfi?
That is a good question to ask, but in summary, I'll give you the short version. I'm a self-taught designer by trade, so I design apps and websites from a professional standpoint, or at least that's what I do during my waking hours, and in the evenings in all of my side hustles. I'm specifically interested in and focusing around mentorship and learning. That I think is where my passion lies, and that has taken me to the space of public speaking. It's taken me to the space of organization development and a couple of different places. But it's really just, I think the design and the mentorship aspects are at the core of, I think, my mission or my life purpose. And then just to keep myself entertained, I also run a podcast, the Edit and Do podcast, and that kind of is just what I like to do to burn the time when I do have a little bit of extra hours.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah.
I want to touch on the podcast, but before I do, I'd like to know your speaking journey. When Alfie was a little boy, were you something that you started early or late to the game?
Yeah. So I say the first experience was early, but I only really got started later on. And I can still remember it quite vividly because it ties into another story that I like to talk quite a little bit about. Relating to my time in school. So I was never really a good academic. But then around the 7th grade, which is around 13 years old, I was sort of doing an entrance exam to high school, the next level of schooling. And so the cool thing about the school that I went to is they had 3 aspects to the entrance exam. One aspect was, it was a scholarship exam. The one aspect was a written piece in English. The other aspect was a mathematics written piece, and the last one was a speech, like an aspect of public speaking. And obviously the maths wasn't super great, and the writing also wasn't great because, I'm a dyslexic and I'm just generally not a great student. But the speaking part, I think, was one of the first times that I saw that I had something special that not everybody else had. And, the previous year, my family is originally Kenyan. But I grew up here in South Africa, and so the previous year we'd gone back to Kenya to visit family and just to be at home. And so it was in 2008, and that year there was like post-election violence because there was a little bit of corruption in the election, and people sort of started rioting, and it was an intense experience. But it was also one of those types of experiences, like, when you start to see the cracks or the edges of society that are a little bit imperfect. Like, I think for the first time as a child growing up, I started to see that. And so in the talk, I spoke a little bit about that experience and how, the society descended into chaos and anarchy, and talked about things that you wouldn't typically expect a 13-year-old to be speaking about. But I think the thing that really stood out for me at that moment is that after having been so bad at academics for so long, I found something that I could do really, really well. And in a sense, after that, I didn't pursue it that much further. As a kid does, I got distracted by many other things, from computer games and girls and all of that kind of stuff. But then in my professional space, once I started working, I started to see the value of public speaking, because I think that's what I was missing before. When you're, as a student, it's hard to really see why that's valuable. But when you start to present things to clients or present things to your team, or need to, speak about specific ideas, you actually start to see the value of being able to communicate and share your ideas in a way that another person can understand. And so I started to develop the skill almost unintentionally at first, just because I liked doing client meetings and doing presentations. And then my elder brother, his name is Alex, he he started doing public speaking first. He did a couple of talks here in South Africa, and then did a few international ones. And then I started to realize, like, if my brother can do this, surely I can as well. And so in a sense, I sort of made a commitment to myself to kind of do it. But I didn't just start by, going out and beginning speaking. For me, in a sense, it started with, I need to have something to speak about. There needs to be something that I care so much about that I'm willing to look like an idiot on stage in front of other people, and it'll still be worthwhile. And so it took some time for me to get there. And as I sort of mentioned, for me, that thing is learning and mentorship. But I first had to read a whole bunch about it, speak to other people who are in the space, get to know what the general landscape is before I actually started speaking on the topic. And so about June this year, I did my first sort of like conference talk. And since then, I think I've spoken at 4 or 5 different conferences. So it's pretty recent, but it's been quite fast as well, and I'm loving it. I'm absolutely loving it.
Brilliant. No, I love it.
Yeah.
And with the podcast, because I see you 44 episodes, your co-host, Edit Undo, I think is the name of the actual podcast. So I want to, on the co-host, is that a relationship partner or just a partner? And how does it actually work? Because I know I do the Polish one with a co-host, so I know, but there's kind of advantages and disadvantages. So I'd like to know your journey on the podcast.
So the podcast kind of started for 2 reasons. One a little bit tongue-in-cheek, and maybe one a little bit more serious. The first is, so at the time we started the podcast, I was still working at my second job, which was ABSA. It's a bank here in South Africa, and I was a designer there. And it was right around about 6 months into the lockdown. A new designer joined the team, and like we kind of got to chatting. We became like design partners. So that's actually where our friendship started. And so we would work together, and we got along really well. And one of the reasons we got along really well is we were both very interested in startup and side businesses and ideas. And so we both realized eventually we were going to leave the bank. And so we wanted to start something together that would keep us connected. But that wasn't so hard, like too much effort. Later on, we would realize that running a podcast is actually hard work. But back then, we didn't necessarily know that. And so that's kind of how we initially got connected. I think the central mission that sort of guided us, I think, was a little bit more related to the different creative disciplines. Because for the both of us, especially when we're younger, I think at some other point, a lot of us have a dream to do something creative, whether it's a musician, a painter, it might be in sports, and you might think that that's not necessarily creative, but there's an argument to be made for it. But then eventually this idea of the starving artist gets introduced, and you believe you can't necessarily make a life out of it or turn it into a job. And so you eventually become a lawyer or an accountant or something a little bit more stable. And then in my experience, eventually dropping out of tertiary education and sort of making my own way, it became clear to me, because of some of the people that I spoke to, that actually it's a lot more practical to make a job out of a creative discipline, as long as you think about it like a job. Like, you realize that there is work that needs to go into it, there's training, there's practice, and all of those things. And so we decided to speak to people of different creative disciplines. So we don't necessarily have a limitation in terms of the discipline or the types of people we speak to, but instead we try to speak to them about how they're turning a creative element into a profession. And by telling their story and exploring their experiences, we make some of these things that seem impossible a little bit more viable and a little bit more practical for people who are considering that specific discipline and journey, while still also letting them know, like, there are still going to be challenges, there are going to be difficulties. It is difficult to make a job out of a creative career, but it's not impossible. And that's kind of like the underlying thread for the program or the platform.
Excellent. And I see
Yeah.
you're on Anchor as well, because just for those listening, I didn't mention it at the start, but this will actually be on
Mm.
Spotify. Spotify own Anchor, and it'll go on video. Do
Mhm.
you put yours out just on audio, or do you actually do audio and video?
So we do audio and video. We like the last episode we released was our first time doing Spotify video. I have to say it's been a good experience learning about it. We had been doing YouTube before, but it's obviously always easier managing one platform rather than two.
No, absolutely. And I mean,
Yeah.
I use YouTube with my Awakening podcast. I got removed from it because they don't like me telling the truth on that one. And recently I start because I have my personal channel, and I had somebody
Uh-huh.
on talking about education, and they
Mm.
removed that one. I had somebody talking about the Holocaust, an ex-victim, she's 84. They removed that. So I'm on strike two for my personal
Wow.
channel. Yeah. So when I see with like Spotify, I mean, because I mean, you the likes of Joe Rogan, he puts stuff out and he talks about everything, which I think that's the way it should be.
Mm.
It doesn't mean that
Yeah.
what I'm saying is correct. You go and do your own research,
Mm.
but not to be kind of, they're saying no,
Restrictive.
that goes against it. But there's something else that I think you're probably the only podcasters in the world, because your co-host, she's got 3 vowels in her surname, deBeer, and you've got 3 vowels. So the two.
Yeah. It's not very often that you find people with three of the same vowel in their surname. So maybe us type of people attract each other.
No, but excellent. And I
Yeah.
mean, we'll make sure we put links anywhere so people can check
Mhm.
it out. So I know that you've done a TEDx, and it's kind
Yes.
of obviously something that you're passionate about, because you mentioned earlier when you're talking, you said, don't care if you make it once the message comes across, and you
Mhm.
get something that's going to touch people. So what was it all about?
Yeah. Yes. So in some ways, the TEDx talk was both about my own personal experiences with the education system, but also specifically what it can look like in the future. So in some ways, the central question that I was trying to address was, all through history, like if we look back at the nature of education, right? It's taken different forms. If you think back to the hunter-gatherers, a lot of the learning that happened in that society was around either cultural, practices, or things that were put on cave paintings. So it was very much about the encapsulation and storage of knowledge in those formats. And then you think to maybe when agriculture gets introduced, and then a lot more of the knowledge is around the tools that we use, and the knowledge that we have about the land that we're sort of taming. Then you look at the Middle Ages, you have the guilds and apprentices, and knowledge sort of gets passed down like that, all the way up until the modern education system with schools and teachers. And so each of them look different, but the one underlying assumption that is the same about all of those is that knowledge has always been assumed to be scarce. It's always been something fleeting that we need to capture and preserve and make sure is passed down to the next generation, whether that's in cave paintings, whether that's stories, whether that's books, whether that's, all of these sort of formats in the past. But in some ways, for the very first time, we're dealing with a new kind of problem, because for the first time, there is more information and knowledge out there than we can deal with. Like the internet has kind of made everything so widely accessible that it's more likely that you can't find the thing rather than the thing doesn't exist. And so the challenge, in some sense, that education aims to address maybe becomes a little bit less of storage and distribution, and a little bit more about navigating the information that's out there. And so what I sort of did is I spoke about 3 ideas that we can use to reconsider how we look at education moving forward. The first was the zone of proximal development. I won't go into too much the detail around it, because I mean our time is relatively limited. But it was introduced by a psychologist called Lev Vygotsky, if anyone wants to go and search it up. But it's basically this idea of, there's 3 zones. There's the things you know how to do, which is your domain of mastered knowledge, the things you don't know how to do. And then in the middle of those 2 areas is the things that you can't do yet, but with a little bit of help and a little bit of stretching, you can learn. And that zone in between those 2 areas is the zone of proximal development. And a lot of our relationships that are specifically geared towards learning are built on top of that concept. It's why a parent-child relationship is so strong, because a parent sorry, there's something I forgot to mention. So the last thing that Vygotsky speaks about is the more knowledgeable other. So to actually get you into that ideal learning zone, having another person who knows more about the discipline actually increases the quality of your learning and the rate of learning. And so the reason a parent can help a child is because they know more about life than a child does, obviously. But this translates to other things in our professional environment. The reason we have managers is because they both have been in the company longer, and maybe they know more about the discipline than you do. And so taking this idea into perspective, one of the things I think that the modern schooling system maybe lacks a little bit is that a teacher doesn't have the capacity to foster that zone of proximal development for that many people. If we look at all the other developmental relationships humans have had, they've all been relatively either a one-to-one relationship, two-to-one in the context of parents, and with guilds and apprentices, it was maybe like 1 to roughly 7. And it was a long relationship. I mean, an apprenticeship used to last up to 7 years. But now between each grade, you're sort of changing, like, you've got a different teacher, you've got different subjects and different teachers for subjects, and the relationships in a sense are not, can't necessarily be used as the underlying structure because the relationships change so often. So that's one of the central ideas. The next one is about self-determination. And it's this theory about how to actually leverage internal motivation, because one of the things that I experienced very often in school is all the things that captured my interest, all the things that distracted me from school, from the video games to sports to, hang out with friends. All of these things that are typically seen to be distractions are the things that leverage your internal interest. So the next idea that I focused on is how, as an education system, can we leverage that internal motivation in service of learning rather than against it? And I think, a lot of the disorders that we experience, like, ADHD and dyslexia and all of that, I think they're only seen as so bad because we don't think about alternative options. Like maybe a dyslexic person has got some other form of learning or thinking that they're more geared to, that is way more effective, but just falls outside of the schooling system as it exists today. And in some ways, for me, that was evident in when I was introduced to audiobooks. I've become an absolute fan and probably a bit of a nutcase about audiobooks. But it's simply because for so long, that was a whole world that was closed to me. And as soon as I got to audiobooks and I found a way that didn't need me to overcome dyslexia, this whole world of knowledge and just sheer human culture that has been stored became open to me. And in a sense, I could begin to teach myself. And in a sense, that was the title of my talk in some ways. It was self-directed learning was the title. And it's really this idea of what does learning look like when education is aimed at helping you navigate the knowledge that's out there, but what you learn is up to you. The rate at which you learn it is determined by the individual. And if you decide you want to change to a different topic, change to a different discipline, or simply change the method of learning, you can do that. And so that's in summary what I was trying to explore. And the last and final element, I think, which I'd like to explore and expand on as sort of my career moves forward, is around mentorship. Because as much as we can have this idea of the zone of proximal development and self-determination theory, underneath all of that, you do need a person who is able to pass knowledge, experience, and challenges on from generation to generation. And so the last aspect that I propose is a way to have a network of mentors, both teachers, but also professionals, parents, more students who are further along in the process than you. Allow those people to actually build a network of mentors that can help learners along the way. And that, in some senses, I think, a summary of the ideas that I was exploring in my talk.
Yeah. Fascinating. And as you're saying that, it made me remember, like, in school in Ireland, and I don't know, is it the same in different countries, but like you had one teacher for the whole year till you were about 12, then you went into another school and every 40 minutes you were just changing. And I
Mm.
know that there was some subjects that I was way better when I was 12 than when I was 15. And also, like, say, history. I was like the worst in the class in one set of teachers going along for a few years. And then I was the best in the class for the same subject for a different teacher. And
Yeah.
the whole education system is kind of, but like from my research, and I mean, I've kind of had a few people on the Awakening podcast kind of discussing that and everything. It's like the education system is kind of, some people think that it's not working right, but it's working exactly the way they want it to work, which is
Exactly.
not serving the people, and it's like just making them compliant to work in the system. And I mean, I was the same. Like I have slight dyslexia because I know that I'm writing stuff and I sometimes I have words backwards and everything, but like in school, it's more on memory. So you were based on everything on memory. There's no other skill set that they look at, and they get rid of all the creativity. So it's just kind of like you either learn and then you go into cooperation and everything is grand, or you're going to be trouble, and they kind of push you to the side.
Yeah. And the thing that's hilarious is it's almost like as soon as you start working, we stop pretending that memorization is necessary. Because I mean, no manager says, go and memorize these clients' phone numbers. No, it's like, as long as you get the business, it's fine. Doesn't matter how you did it. Doesn't matter how creative your solution was. The thing is that you actually achieved it. But when we're in school, we somehow believe that what we need to do is ensure that this person can recite A, B, and C. And if they can do that, then they're a good student. And if they can't do that, then they're a bad student. And it's like, it's sort of just like once we start working and there's actually real money at stake, we stop pretending.
Exactly. And I mean, if you look back at all the different things that we had to learn poetry constantly from one teacher because that was his thing. What has that served me? And yet you had to spend hours learning it. Then you get it wrong, you had to write it out. I don't know how many times, but that wasn't just unique to us. That's unique to a load. And also would say the homework. I mean, like I was wishing a friend of mine happy birthday just a couple of days ago. And we were talking because we were friends from school. He was saying that the teacher caught him talking and put sellotape across his mouth. Yeah. And there's so many, like, I know they stopped punishment. I don't know, when we were about 14 or something like that. Some schools still have that around the world. And it's like parents kind of put them into a school and let them off without taking full control and learning what's really going on there. And and I know that, I don't know what it's like where you are in South Africa, but in America, I think there's something like 2 million that are homeschooling. And with my youngest child, I've put him into a place they don't have homework, because when you've got loads of homework, you don't have time for your family, and then there's stress trying to teach the child instead of actually just enjoying life and getting creative and say, hey, do some music, do some sport, do some. It's totally the opposite. And I think parents have to kind of take control of this instead of going, oh, the school knows better. No, they don't.
Exactly. No, you're so right. And it's kind of funny because to me it almost seems like both sides, the school and the parents, are kind of like both outsourcing the responsibility. It's like the parents send the kids to school and expect the school to almost parent them, and then the school sends the kids home with homework and expects the parents to teach them. And it's like, whose job is what here? So I think you're absolutely right. And I think moving forward, we're going to have to start thinking about homeschooling a little bit more seriously. Just because, I mean, as you mentioned, like, school is working the way it's supposed to right now. It was meant to bring out factory workers. It was designed specifically for cookie cutter type people. The need has changed. And so in a sense, what we need now is a thing that can mold around the specific needs, the specific interests, and both the capabilities and disabilities of the individual, and design a method of learning centered around that.
Like I've looked at the Finnish system, and I know that there was some American guy that done the documentary, and he was shocked. It was like they were saying, yeah, I don't know, is it 6 hours or less, and plus breaks, and they don't have the tests and they don't have the homework.
Wow.
They're one of the top in the world. And it's like, why for every single system, not just the education system, they don't just replicate what is the best? Can you imagine how society would be if that was kind of replicated instead of getting 3 hours of homework and You know, because I mean, I know that I could read it. It went in one ear and out the other. I could read it 100 times
Hmm.
and it just didn't work. And then same with speaking. I got
Yeah.
up on stage and I couldn't memorize stuff. So I just kind of was doing it my way and that worked. And
Mm.
but nobody's
Yeah.
kind of, you know, it was brilliant that you were what 13 and you kind
Yeah.
of realized, hey, I've got a gift there. You didn't jump on it straight
Mm.
away, but to know that, I mean, a school should be
Mm.
actually pushing that towards you.
Exactly. And I think if a school, because it's easy to almost become super critical about schools and be a little bit cynical about the situation. But to me, I look at it as just potential waiting to be untapped. Because if I think about, the number of people who have turned out to be, world renowned that struggled in school, it always makes me think about how many other people are there that didn't find the thing, that didn't have that opportunity to do a public speaking and learn that they had this specific talent, or were told that this talent is not useful, and they follow another path for years and years and years. And the world, in a sense, there's a gap the size of that specific talent in the world that gets left open if you aren't able to nurture it. And I think so many schools have the opportunity to make the most of that. Um, and it's hard. The thing that especially so before I kind of did this TEDx talk, I started running a mentorship program so that I could be speaking about things that I actually knew about and experienced myself, not necessarily just theoretical things and research and so on. And one of the things that I learned very quickly is the biggest the biggest bottleneck to learning is the amount of educators that we have. Because the thing is, kids are going to learn regardless of what we do. I mean, it's not like we have to give a baby a manual of how to be a baby 101. No, they sort of just get born into this world and immediately they're learning, from first taking their first breath to how to cry and communicate with their mother through that, to speaking, walking, and so on. And even us as adults many years later, it's not like somebody needs to tell us we need to learn a new thing. It's just sort of like something interests us. We pursue it for a little bit, and more we kind of pick things up until we find this is a new skill that we've developed. So in a sense, the learning will always be there. The question is, are there people who can aid your learning in an area or discipline that speaks to you, that leverages that internal motivation? Or are you going to have to do it on your own? Because doing it on your own is always an option. I think one of the things we sometimes get wrong when we're trying to make the world a better place is assuming that people can't do things for themselves. I think they can. I think the place where we can actually have impact as a society and as individuals is in how fast people learn. And by giving of our time, we can improve the trajectory of which people will learn new disciplines, learn new things, become better around a specific area. And that's one of the reasons why, in some ways, I'm focusing a lot of my time and my mental resources around mentorship, because I think it's the place where we can have the most positive impact.
Absolutely. And, you mentioned earlier that, there's so much stuff out there now. It's kind of the opposite to what it was before. How would you advise people navigating this minefield to try to gear towards the A learners, the A mentors, the top players that are going to, as opposed to, I suppose let's call it, even there's coaches out there, they go in, they pay $10 for a certificate and then they're your coach and you could land on their lap. What's the best way of it? Is it more kind of looking at the reviews? Because they can even, unfortunately, the way with bots and with paid stuff, people actually can pay people to even give them 5-star ratings. So even with that, it's kind of even hard to.
Yeah, I think with this, there are a couple of hard truths about it and a couple of optimistic aspects. So the first thing that I think we need to realize is that there is nobody who can do it for you. There's no coach who is going to be able to learn things for you, who's going to give you the golden key that opens all of the knowledge to you. In some ways, at the end of the day, it's going to be work. It's going to be you working, like being really bad at a thing for a long time until you pick up enough skills to be okay at it, and then pick up more and eventually become good at it. And I think once you've accepted that, I think it becomes a little bit easier, because in a sense, you're not conceptually relying on a mentor to teach you. So I think, to me, that's the first thing that you need to, in some ways, accept. Then once you've done that, I think the one thing that we maybe sometimes get a little bit wrong is we're not always comfortable, in a sense, explore for ourselves. Because to me, getting a mentor is almost like step 3 in the process, not step 1. Like, we first need to find something. The first thing to think about is your interest. Like, what are the things that almost naturally just pique your interest? Like, do you find yourself, swaying your hips when music gets played? Or do you find that, when you see an artistic piece, there's a part of your mind that kind of like just switches on? Or is it a matter of when there is like numbers involved in things, your mind starts to race a little bit? Because I think very often our interest is almost like an instinct that drives us towards learning. The things that a baby is interested in are the things that are good for a baby to learn. I mean, when a baby, for example, isn't hot, isn't hungry, isn't sleepy, and isn't in some kind of pain, what they're doing is following things that they're interested in and playing games that they find to be fun. And sometimes those games are like something like peekaboo. That's something that's very simple, right? It's just doing this. But what a baby really is learning is continuity across time. That just because I can't see your face doesn't mean your face is gone. And when they open it again, they're saying, oh, even though the face is not there anymore, the human still exists behind the hands. And in a sense, obviously, a baby just laughs and plays along with you. And it seeseems very innocent on the surface level, but that doesn't disappear. Like, if you were to, let's say, speak to a college student and you speak to them about the things that they're interested in, and they say, maybe they're interested in sport, maybe they're interested in partying a little bit, maybe they're interested in maybe one obscure subject like art history. Like, for example, a teenager being interested in partying, like, it's easy to say that that's just them wasting time, or that's them kids being kids. But actually what it is, it's the stage of your life when you're trying to integrate your personal identity and the group that distinguish between your personal identity and the group that you belong to. And by being a part of that group outside of normal parental control, that's where you actually distinguish and catalyze your personal identity. And in some ways, that's the most important thing for you to learn at that specific point in time. And your interest in some way directs you towards that. Now, as I sort of mentioned, there is still the aspect of you needing to turn it into productive time. Like, if every time you go out, all you do is, get blackout drunk and then wake up the next day with a hangover, you're not actually learning anything, because your interest only sets you in the right direction. But you still need to put in the work to learn the valuable lessons. And so I think once you've accepted that it's work and you've found a specific area that piques your interest, that's when you start to look for a mentor. Because when you're interested in something, it's way easier for you to distinguish the good from the bad. Like, if you really like music, you can tell bad music from good music. But if you're not that interested in music, it kind of starts to sound all the same. Or maybe the genres is a little bit of a better example. For many people, a very good rapper and a decent rapper can be put into the same box. But for that same person, let's say a Mozart and another normal composer might be worlds apart. And so in a sense, your interest is what will actually help you to distinguish the good from the bad. I don't think there's any rating system or anything like that that can ever replace that, because there'll always be new knowledge. And that new knowledge is not going to have a rating yet. There is going to be people who are claiming to be able to code something, and you're not going to be able to tell. But by listening to what they say and comparing that to your interest and experiences, you can start to distinguish quality from people who, like, the wolves in sheep's clothing. And so I think those two things can really help. The last thing that I mentioned, and it was an idea that my brother Alex shared with me, specifically around finding mentors, is that one of the biggest challenge for a mentor is the time requirement needed to mentor a person. And so when you want to find a good mentor, what you want to do is decrease the time requirement as much as you can. And there are a couple of ways you can do that. The first is being clear about what your expectations are. Like, what do you actually want from the mentorship relationship before you start it? Like, are you trying to learn a new skill? Is there a specific challenge in your life that you're unable to overcome by yourself? Like, you need to make that at least relatively clear enough that you can communicate it to the mentor. Then the other one is this idea of the mentorship Voltron. And I think it's an idea that he said he read somewhere, but I'm not sure where. But it's basically taking all the aspects of mentorship that you need in your professional life, maybe as a parent, as a friend, maybe as a spouse. These are all aspects where you need to learn. But you don't necessarily need the same mentor in each one of those, because sometimes, we've got this idea that there's going to be this super amazing Yoda type of person who knows everything and knows the right question to ask at the right time, regardless of the problem that you're going to face. But that's not real. What you can instead do is maybe have 5 or 6 people who are helping you in a specific element. And then once you have that, you can, when you're, let's say, trying to grow as a parent, you speak to the person who is mentoring you in that space. When you're trying to grow in your professional environment, you can speak to someone in that space. And by doing that, each mentor requires less time to give you, but you still get the full mentorship experience. The other thing is you also start to be able to compare what is a good mentor versus what is a bad mentor. And once you do that, you can essentially just substitute some of them out until you've got the best set of mentors that you could possibly find. And that is how I would approach something like that.
No, excellent advice. Because I know some people, they get into even say mastermind groups, and I'm in one and I'm in a very good one. I was in another one before and it was not so good, and I've been in very decent. But I know some people, they tend to be in 5 or 6 of them, and I think for something like that, people think they're missing out and they try to do too much. And with the mentor, the advice you gave there is great, because even for sport or something, you do know the people that are really helping you, as opposed to everyone has their own kind of style of teaching. And if it's not serving you, don't feel bad. You just move on and find somebody that's actually going to lift you up, as opposed to keep you where you are.
And when you're interested in something, it's so much easier to tell that. Because, for example, if you really, really love basketball, and your coach says, okay, like he's kind of like on his phone, he's not really watching the shots that you're making. He says, sort of, go do 10 laps and then shoot 100 shots and then play a game. It's like, this guy doesn't actually want me to be better. He's just trying to do his job and get paid. And so you can maybe look for someone who is as interested as you are in basketball as a coach, as you are interested as a player. And using interests, to me, always is a good gauge, or a good rule of thumb, to at least assume, or like when you don't have evidence, it's a good substitute for evidence.
Excellent. And just finally, because I love talking about the social media, because it's like it's a minefield out there. Just what's your kind of, especially because you've got the podcasting as well as your business, and you mentioned about websites and the design. So like what do you think is kind of served you best, and what has sucked the time? Because there's probably 50 of them out there now, if not more.
Specifically for social media?
Yeah.
I'd say, to me, the most valuable social media, and I even struggled sometimes to call it social media, is YouTube. I think of all the social media, it's probably had the biggest positive impact on the world, simply because it's made knowledge accessible in a format that doesn't require literacy. And I don't think any of the platforms that provide value can claim that. I think, so from that perspective, to me, YouTube is the most valuable. It's probably the one that I spend the most time on as well, just because it's got a broad range of content, and I can sort of follow my interest, and I feel like it's time well spent. Like that to me is always the gauge, because with things like TikTok, like I think it's a great platform for high volume distribution. Like, a lot of people will see your piece of content if it's good, regardless of whether you've got a lot of followers. Like, it's possible for a person without a lot of followers to blow up, which is a good thing, because it means that good ideas that are told by not necessarily famous people can still be accessed by the majority. And I think that's one of the weaknesses a lot of social media platforms have. Like, you have to already have a following to be able to have a voice. But that's not the case with TikTok. The problem with that is a lot of the things that people are interested are pretty silly. And so a lot of silly things tend to inundate all of TikTok. And so it's really easy to waste time with things that are like, immediate dopamine hits, but are not necessarily valuable in the long term. And so I think
dopamine hits that make you a dope, I suppose. That's what you're just.
Yeah, they really put the dope in dopamine. Exactly. And so I think I have to say one of the ones that I think has been quite good and also at the same time not that good is Instagram. I think one of the things that Instagram did really well is it's actually a really great way for people to connect. Like if, for example, I'm going to meet a person and I look at their Instagram profile, I think it's a good way to not necessarily get an understanding of how good you are of a person or what you look like, because some of the filters are a little bit scary these days. But it is a good way for me to get an understanding of what you're interested in. And to get an idea of, some of the things that you've done and where you are in your life. So I think from that perspective, it's really good. I think how we as a society treat filters and the way we look in real life versus the way we look digitally, I don't think that's good. I think anything that's obscuring the truth is really a good thing. I mean, and so for that reason, I think Instagram it's a double-edged sword, and Twitter also a very double-edged sword. And so I think of all the platforms, I think positive to negative ratio, YouTube is the highest. I think it's got its weaknesses as well, and especially now it's becoming more and more censored, which is not a great thing. But I think even with the censorship, it's still a valuable tool. It can obviously still be better, like many things, but I think it still provides something that's extremely valuable. Even the short form content, so just on a little bit of a tangent, because I think the one thing that's different with YouTube Shorts and TikTok is that YouTube Shorts relies more on searching. Like you search for a thing and then it gives you shorts related to that thing. I think it's much harder to find content that's about a specific thing on TikTok than it is on YouTube. And so I think the search engine aspect of YouTube is probably what's going to keep the search engine in conjunction with the short form content is what will keep YouTube in the game for quite a while longer than other short form platforms. I think TikTok and Instagram need their search to be significantly better before they will be able to compete at least with YouTube. That's
fascinating. Yeah, and I must start delving in a bit more into Snapchat, because all I've been doing is using that for family, just selling silly pictures that I record with the facial thing. But I didn't know that you could check out people. So brilliant. Thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Should we let people know, Alfie, how they can get in contact with you, and also name the podcast where they'll find out as well?
Yeah. So if you like some of the things that I talk about and don't mind sitting with me for an hour every now and then, you can listen to the Edit Undo podcast, where we explore the creative landscape, both in Africa and the world at large. But outside of that, you can find me on LinkedIn for the professional environment. It's Alfi Oloo. And then on Instagram, you can find me at Alfi, ALFI.OLOO, or you can catch the podcast. The podcast is Edit Undo podcast, I think, something like that. I could be wrong, but it's got a blue logo, so I'm sure you'll find it. And yeah, that's where you can find me. I'm super open to chatting to people. If you just want to have a short casual coffee, a short virtual coffee, I'm happy to do that. If you're in South Africa and you want real life coffee, I'm also open to that. But I'm generally open to conversation. So definitely reach out. And yeah, thank you so much.
Perfect. And I'll make sure I'll put all the links both on the audio and the video, and I'll have the actual the podcast one as well, so that they'll be able to just go in and click on it, and they'll be able to find you. So I want you to not only give me a 5-star rating, because it all helps, but make sure you go into Alfi's podcast as well and give him a 5-star rating, because it gets more people to actually see it, the way the algorithms work and everything. So I know that he'll appreciate it. So you find me on speakingpodcast.com, or on BitChute and YouTube. Sure to give us a thumbs up, 5-star rating. As I mentioned, both on the video as well, gives a thumbs up. It all helps. And everything about my coaching, bio.link/podcaster. Until next week, take care.